Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So tonight we are checking out the new featured location, and that is Deep Space. Deep Space says card text is disabled here, so no card text is going to be working. So what kind of decks are we using to take advantage of this location? Starting out, we have Patriot. So Patriot, obviously pretty good with this one, as we have a lot of no text cards we can play into this lane, so we don't care if their effects are disabled anyway. And then we'll boost them up later with things like Patriot, Mystique, and Blue Marvel. We also have Ultron, so we can get a bunch of drones in that lane if we don't want to stack up our no text cards or if we don't draw them. Invisible Woman serves as a bit of Enchantress protection and keeps the opponent guessing a bit as to what we're going to play. And then Super Scroll is going to be probably needed for the mirror matches, as I imagine there are going to be a lot of other Patriot players for this location. Then Debris, not only do the rocks sometimes interfere with the opponent trying to play things where they want, but also gives us a much needed counter to things like Galactus. Another version of Patriot that looks like it could be good for this location is the Iron Lad version of Patriot. Now, typically these have been running Iron Man, but this build we have here from Moyen, who recently won a tournament with it, and he has a tech of Killmonger, which is actually a really neat inclusion here, because now that we are running Invisible Woman, you can hide the Killmonger behind her, so that way we can snipe things like Kitty Pryde at the end of the game, regardless of priority. This also can be useful in the mirror match sometimes against an opposing Ultron as well. This is definitely more of a greedy version of the deck, but that's just kind of the way you want to build it for Iron Lad, as we do want a chance of hitting big things like our Doctor Doom, Onslaught, or Blue Marvel. And as mentioned before, Super Scroll mainly here for the mirror, though sometimes there are other ongoing effects that can be beneficial too, but it's mainly for those Patriot mirrors, which I expect to be pretty prevalent for this location. Another deck here that seems to benefit from this one is the Shuri Zero deck. So pretty standard version here. I opted to include Arrow. I know she was cut from Shuri decks a while ago, but I do think this card actually does have some potential now, given that people are relying pretty hard on a Hulk as a endgame win condition. Being able to just pull their Hulk over to a lane where they're already winning seems really, really good. Especially when you factor in we can accompany it with She-Hulk if we're floating on turn 5, so that's pretty nice, especially if we also played Shuri on turn 4. Other than that, pretty standard Shuri deck. We are the Sauron version, so we get to run these ongoing cards, and Ebony Maw is also obviously a good one to play into the location, as you will not be prevented from playing other cards there afterwards. Also makes things like Typhoid Mary and Red Skull better if we don't happen to hit our Sauron. Then we have another version here that goes in a slightly different direction. This one is all about the critical mass of running these kind of bad text 4-drops that otherwise are really good in this location. So we have things like Atuma, we have things like Sentry, and Typhoid Mary. So 3 different 4/10s, all good with Shuri as well. This deck is really about just putting out a whole ton of power and making it hard for the opponent to deal with. We're running Zero to accompany our Titania and Ebony Maw, who are both good in the location, and Zero acts as a kind of way to get rid of those effects when we don't have the location pop up. Armor for a bit of protection. Invisible Woman helps offset some of these negative downsides, particularly for things like Ebony Maw and Atuma, so it won't blow up. Maximus just there for some raw power, and then Taskmaster to hopefully copy something that we were able to Shuri. So this is much more focused on the kind of bad text cards, but seems like it is going to take pretty good advantage of the location. Another direction you could go in is Lockdown. This is one that features Sentry, so again, Sentry works really well with the location as we don't have to mitigate the downside, but we do have things like Viper to help us out if we do need to mitigate it, because obviously we're not going to get the location every game. We have Storm, Spider-Man, and Professor X to hopefully lock down a lane, and given that most opponents probably aren't going to want to play into the location, this can be really powerful, so lane lock kind of gets a decent boost here. Juggernaut helps out with that as well. We can just punt them into the deep space at the end of the game to prevent a otherwise scary effect. Gamora gives us another way to go tall on the 5th turn or the final turn. Daredevil helps with that accuracy of being able to be sure we're locking out the correct lane on turn 5. And then Nebula, just really good with lane lockout stuff. Zabu to help ramp out some 4-drops. And the Hood, so we have another thing to donate with Viper, and it gives us pretty decent power in the Demon. Another direction you can consider with the lane lock archetype is the high Evo version. This has been the most popular version on ladder, and it's definitely one I've found a lot of success with myself. Uses the combination of Sunspot, Nebula, and Misty Knight to take over the early game. I opted to include armor here as more people are starting to run Killmonger to deal with this deck, as well as some of the other popular stuff like Kitty Pryde. Jeff is always good with the location lockdown decks. This one's only running Spider-Man and Storm, because you don't really want Professor X in a deck where you're trying to float mana on the Hulk. So the main things that are going to be closing down our lanes to hold out the power are going to be our 1-drops, our Cyclops, and our Iron Lad. And then Doom can help us get back in there if necessary on the final turn of the game. And Hulk is nice because oftentimes Hulk can just win a lane on his own. So as long as our lockout is able to get us one lane, Hulk can usually close it out on the final turn. And last but not least, we have Sarah Control. So this deck is obviously the kind of premier control deck in the format. It can output a lot of its own power, but it's also able to be very reactive and deal with big things that the opponents are doing. I opted to include a Scarlet Witch in this build as the lane lockdown decks have been getting more popular recently, so having Witch as an answer to something like Storm definitely seems beneficial. A Lizard is nice for this location as we can turn off our downside, and I believe Mysterio avoids getting affected as well. I think he will still summon his Mysterio clones, and I think he still becomes a 4 power if you put the real one there at the end of the game, so those help get around it. Which is kind of convenient. But yeah, also we have Killmonger, which is good against the lane lockdown stuff if they're not running armor, as well as other Sarah and Kitty decks. So if you want to be a bit more in control of what's going on with the game rather than leaning heavily into the location, Sarah's probably a pretty good way to go. And that's going to wrap it up for the decks for tonight's featured location, Deep Space. As always, if you want to import any of the decks, links will be in the description where you can grab the deck codes. That's going to wrap it up for this one. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.